What could the role of AI be in transforming how citizens are interacting with the government in Utah?
We're dealing with a non-deterministic capability, which is really unique for people like me who've been in technology for most of their careers. So this fundamental question, can we trust AI to give us accurate, consistent responses? It's been at the top of mind, since this technology came out. And so we did an interesting exercise with the Utah State Tax Commission. As judged by an expert panel of human beings, the technology was delivering responses that were equivalent to or better than the knowledge of the human around 65 to 70% of the time. And then the other times it was hallucinating or simply not responding.
Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning into another episode of the Chief AI Officer Show. Today I'm speaking with Christian Napier, who is the Director of AI at the Utah Division of Technology Services. Christian, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Ben, for having me. Really grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one, at the chance to dig into how the state level is using AI and some of the work that you're doing in particular. Can you give our guests just a brief background on yourself so they have a little context?
Yeah, so background on myself, I've been with the state of Utah since March of 2024, so I'm a pretty recent hire by public sector standards. When I was initially hired, I was not hired with AI in the title. I was hired for something else, but AI had really taken the world by storm, and our chief information officer, he asked me to assume AI as part of my responsibilities in May of 2024. And then shortly after that, had me focused exclusively on AI as the director of AI for our division. Now, just a point of clarification there. The Division of Technology Services in the state of Utah is the central IT shop for state executive branch agencies. So I oversee the implementation and rollout of AI in the executive branch. There's also an AI responsibility with the Department of Commerce, which established by legislation last year, the Utah Office of AI Policy, and that is held or led by Dr. Zach Boyd. Their focus is really on regulation and policy making for citizens and for companies that are interested in doing AI-related work in the state. So it's more of an external-facing thing. And then here in the Division of Technology Services, our focus is really on the implementation of AI in government.
There's so much that we can get into there. So I want to start with maybe just the moment for you or the conversations you had when you were put in this position of, what could the role of AI be in transforming how citizens are interacting with the government in Utah?
I would say extreme cautious optimism. This is really once in a generation technology. I've been around for a long time, seen a lot of things come and go. This has a massive potential and also huge question marks, right? So when I was afforded the opportunity, I was super excited. At the same time, approaching it with a lot of trepidation because there are a lot of questions. The technology is evolving super rapidly. Everybody's trying to stay abreast of the latest evolutions in the technology, which seem to be happening on almost a daily basis. But I guess generally speaking, I was really, really excited, for the opportunity to come in and work with AI, because I do think it can have a significant impact on the way government operates and the way citizens interact with their government. So from that standpoint, I'm pretty bullish, but also I've got, fingers and toes crossed as we embark on this journey.
And why are those fingers and toes crossed? Can you just give me a sense of what are some of the biggest things you're concerned about?
Well, I think this will be familiar to all your listeners, right? We're dealing with a non-deterministic capability, which is really unique for people like me who've been in technology for most of their careers, where 1 + 1 always equaled 2. You put in, the algorithms run, they spit out an output, and you could get it on a consistent basis. And that's been a challenge. I mean, that is the fundamental challenge of this technology, is the probabilistic nature of it, and trying to find ways to ensure that it operates within the bounds that we wish to set. we did an interesting exercise with the Utah State Tax Commission. So this fundamental question, can we trust AI to give us accurate, consistent responses, has been at the forefront. It's been at the top of mind, since this technology came out. And so we conducted a pilot with that express purpose in mind, not testing out UX or anything like this. It's literally, can we get responses that we can trust? And after the first phase of that, what we saw is that as judged by an expert panel of human beings, the technology was delivering responses that were equivalent to or better than a knowledgeable human, around 65, depending on the vendor, because we actually did it across multiple vendors, 65 to 70% of the time. And then maybe another 20, 25%. It was close, but maybe missing some important information. And then the other times it was hallucinating or simply not responding. And so we decided to take a deeper dive with these various vendors. I'm not going to name the names, to see if we could get it better. And 3 out of the 4 vendors, actually, we were able to get some pretty impressive results from them. But it took months of work. I mean, it was really, really hard to dial it in on the specifically narrowly focused tax questions. And at the same time, honor all the guardrails. Don't answer questions about California taxes, or don't answer questions that you shouldn't be answering. Don't be talking to people about avoiding paying taxes and these kind of things. So it was hard, but we were able to do it to the point where we actually were able to make a selection. And now we're in the process of deploying a solution to production there. But it was really, really challenging. And we've learned a lot of lessons. And the technology continues to evolve. So that's great. Hard to keep up with it all the time. But I think that for us, especially in public sector, being able to trust output is paramount.
Yeah, you nailed all of the key things there, I think, to your point at the start that so many people on this show mention, right? Which is the non-deterministic nature of these systems and the issues that creates for explainability, accuracy, really making sure that you're providing the right answer in that moment. And the example you gave, a good one, again, in like a very constrained domain, but still a ton of work going into actually getting that system to, get to the level of reliability that allows you to deploy. Obviously, government has potentially even higher standards than the private sector when it comes to ensuring, that level of transparency, accountability. What do you think is the difference that you've seen, or like what are some of the most common themes you've seen in those differences between the private sector and the government sector when it comes to adopting these technologies?
Ben, that's a great question. Certainly in public sector, we're dealing with a lot of sensitive and regulated data, first and foremost. And there is a lot of statute and regulation around the collection and the use of that data. Particularly here in the state of Utah, recently legislation created the Office of Data Privacy. We have a chief data privacy officer in the state of Utah. Most state agencies have a dedicated privacy officer, and they are very, very keen on ensuring that we make data privacy paramount in everything that we do, right? So how that manifests itself in practical terms is, our small AI team, it's me and 2 AI engineers, analysts, really brilliant people. We created in the state and launched in March of this year what we call the AI Factory, which is basically a fancy word for here's a set of streamlined processes and procedures that you can follow in an agency if you want to implement AI for a thing. And at the beginning of that process sits a number of risk assessments. So there's an AI risk assessment that we undertake, but there's also a privacy impact assessment, at least an initial one that is undertaken by an agency's privacy officer, and a high-level security assessment before anything can go into any kind of pilot it's got to go through this gauntlet of things. So, in an area of vibe coding, and I'm just going to build an app for that, it doesn't really work like that here, because we have to make sure that we're honoring the privacy of our citizens, of our constituents. That really has to be at the very, very top, and that we're making sure that we are using the data they provide us for the purpose for which it was intended to be shared with us, and not just because we have access. And so there's a lot that goes in on the front end to make sure that when we start something, we're doing it responsibly. And that's challenging to a certain degree, because it can be seen as potentially slowing down innovation. Instead of just letting people go, there are frameworks and there are things that we need to do. So we have to be a little bit more judicious and intentional about the way that we approach things. But ultimately, we believe that it is for the benefit of the citizenry that we proceed with caution, and that we make sure that we are honoring both the spirit and the letter of the law as we implement these AI solutions.
Yeah, I think having that very clear at the outset is critical to determine success. Are there any other things that you've seen drive successful adoption, or examples of successful use cases once they pass that gauntlet? What stands out to you?
Well, I think a success for us has been the rollout of office productivity AI. So our state primarily uses Google Workspace as our office productivity suite. So I'm not saying this is an endorsement of any particular technology solution. I'm just saying, hey, this is what we use, right? So we did a pilot starting at the summer of last year, and we had 257 participants across most state agencies participating in this pilot. And that pilot went really well. And there was a lot of positive feedback on AI, and we did surveys and things like this, and people who were high volume users of generative AI were reporting, again, this is self-attestation here, right? So we weren't in there, with a stopwatch and clocking people, like how long it took them to write an email using AI versus the old way, or that kind of stuff. So we just say, give us some time bands, like, it doesn't save me any time. It saves me less than an hour, 1 to 2 hours, 3 to 5 hours, et cetera. So using those bands and going at the low end of those bands, the high volume users were self-reporting, they were saving on average 3.5 hours a week by using Gemini for Google Workspace. So in January, I think it was, of this year, Google made a big announcement and said, we're going to fold the Gemini for Google Workspace capability into the core Workspace offering. So it's just now there. That gave us the opportunity to roll this out to all of the citizens, because we could do it without incurring any additional license cost, which was a big deal. If you think, back before then, if we were going to roll this out, it was going to be $200 per person per year. If we have 22,000 employees, we could be spending $5 million a year on generative AI licenses. We didn't have the budget. And so we were through the pilot trying to figure out what is the profile of user that could benefit from this. And then all of a sudden we're like, well, we can give it to everybody. So we started rolling it out to agencies on an opt-in basis in February. And now all agencies have at least one group of people who are using the platform. And the number of active users, meaning in Google terms, people who have used it at least once, used generative AI at least once in the last 4 weeks, is now about 9,500 employees who are using the solution. But the high volume users, the percentage of people who tracked the same level of usage as we had in the pilot, those high volume users right now are running around 27% of that 9,000. And we did a survey last month of those active users to determine impact, and it came out the results were the same as they were in the pilot. So when we did the math, it's like, well, these people are self-reporting, even if you go at the low end of the bands, that they're saving nearly 12,000 hours a week collectively using generative AI. And if you just expand that out over a year, it's over 600,000 hours annually that employees are at current usage levels are reported that they are saving. That's a big deal, right? So I think that's a success story. And what made it really successful up until now is a lot of communication, having a policy in place at the outset that kind of said this is the proper and improper usages, having mandatory AI responsible use training for all state employees, which we implemented in 2024, that has to be taken on an annual basis. And then a ton of like lunch and learn stuff, open office hours, having cross-agency user groups where people share their wins and their challenges with using these tools. I think that was a very successful thing. On the flip side, we've seen a lot of kind of agency-specific, internal, knowledge-based chatbots not seeing high levels of adoption. And we took, after we did the factory thing and launched it in March, we were rocking along with some of these pilots, struggling to get them to production. We're thinking, what is going on here? Well, there are a couple of things. Number one, we were able to run pilots on the cheap because vendors have been very willing to run pilots and proofs of concepts for basically nothing. So there's no cost to do an experiment. So that's great. We appreciate the generosity of our partners and vendors. That's fantastic. The problem is then when you go to deploy in production, you realize the total cost of ownership is going to be this. Then people start getting a little worried. It's like, okay, well, we thought that the cost was going to be X. Turns out it's going to be Y because we've got to create, in order to meet these requirements, an agentic framework that ends up vastly increasing the number of tokens that are being used. And, we significantly underestimated how many tokens were going to be used in a process. But also, the nature of these processes themselves are often optional. I don't know if you've heard this from other people that you've talked to on your podcast, but, okay, we have an existing process that's in place. We stand up a chatbot over here to help a call center agent answer a question or so on and so forth. But a lot of these people are like, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know my stuff. Like, I don't need this bot to be telling me things. And they're not engaging with it or paying as much attention. And I think in the future, as we look, in the state for ways that we can really have impact, focusing more on business value and not just, we can stand up a chatbot because we know how is one. And then really understanding where are those areas where we can do rip and replace, where we can take an old process and replace it with a new process where AI is infused in that process. And there's no going back to the old process. For example, in the state, we're going through a big HR system transformation. We're moving from an old platform to a new platform. And on July 1st of this year, the old platform went read only. We can't use it anymore. So adoption is not optional. Like, okay, we have to adopt it because the old platform is gone. We're not seeing a lot of that with AI yet, but I think for it to be successful, that's where we need to get, is we just need to take out the old stuff and we need to replace it with new stuff that has AI infused into it. So that was kind of a long-winded answer to your question there, Ben. I apologize, but I kind of look at it through those two lenses. One, those or examples or stories. One was that kind of office productivity use case, which we're all familiar with if you're a ChatGPT user or whatever, or a Copilot. And then the other one was kind of the more either in-house built or configured AI solutions where we've been facing some challenges, honestly, getting from pilot to production for the reasons that I articulated.
Yeah, well, you're not the only one, whether inside government or the private sector. There's so much there that I want to unpack because you touched on a lot of really great things. One, I love the example of Gemini being rolled out across the workspace because so much of what we're seeing with LLMs in particular is the democratizing of the use cases and how people use it, and just because it's such an accessible interface for someone to use it in whatever way they feel. And so I feel like that's a great example of just a very simple barrier to adoption dismantled because of the decision, to roll it out across the workspace. I'm really curious, before I get on to some of the other questions I had about what you said, did you see, you mentioned the high usage segment. Were they coming with use cases to those like win sharing sessions, as you called them? Like, were they bringing that and kind of distributing it across the other agencies? Or did you see kind of a few select people that were heavy users, uncovered all these great use cases, and then like they drove adoption as well? Was that kind of an organic process that unfolded at all? Or was it, I'd love to learn more about that.
I really appreciate that bring that up. So I'll caveat all this saying, like, we have a long ways to go, because still over 50% of our people are not using it on a regular basis, right? So there's a lot of work still to do. At the same time, we need to give ourselves grace, and honestly, I think other organizations need to give themselves a little bit of grace if they're feeling frustrated, like, hey, it's not getting it adopted fast enough. I mean, I come from a time where when I started my career, email was one form of communication, but it was not dominant. I mean, we used interoffice memos. We had a lot of typewritten stuff going around, in the office, because I'm an old dude, and it takes a while for these new technologies to catch on. That being said, I mean, the adoption is going fast, and people are really eager to see, one, folks adopt it, and two, identify impact. Is it really making a difference? But to the point that you made about being organic, one of the challenges is that sometimes we have in organizations, and particularly in public sectors, is we want to make sure that this stuff is planned out thoroughly, and we've got roadmaps for this, and all of that is important. We're going to do a training this month on Notebook LM, and then next month in our Tacos and Tech Tuesday, we're going to do another training on gems, or whatever it is. So we offer those, but really where the rubber hits the road is bottom up, people coming up with their own use cases, figuring it out, and then they have a natural inclination to want to share it because they just scored a big win. Like last week, our networking team, they were trying to solve a problem and or automate a process that is very labor intensive for them. And they had AI help them write a bash script that ended up, I mean, in their terms, not mine, saving them literally thousands of hours of manual work, right? So how did I hear about it? I heard about it not because I solicited it. I heard about it because these guys on the network team were so excited about what they had just done that they wanted to share it. They're like, hey, you want to hear this? This was really cool. And so that happens. And I think, we've taken steps, but we haven't done as much in the state as we probably can to really open up the communication channels for people to share those wins with wider audiences, especially across agencies. We have a chat group where people go in and kind of share these wins, but I think a lot more can be done in that area. And ultimately, I think from an office productivity standpoint, it will be successful as people uncover these amazing use cases and then share them with their colleagues. We do what we can to create an environment where people want to learn and stuff, but ultimately it's a bottom up thing that is going to make this thing successful or not.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's what's so powerful about this technology in particular is that bottom up process from the people that are dealing with the business problem every day or whatever problem it might be. Like they're usually the most equipped to understand what a good solution looks like. And now there's maybe the opportunity for them to fix it without having to go back and forth with an engineering team or whatever it might be how you solved that problem before in the past. I want to touch on something else that you said, which was the chatbots, right? Like, I think when this first came out, everyone was trying to build like that one perfect knowledge chatbot across the entire org that would, surface every piece of information that everybody ever wanted at any given moment. That clearly, not working out to some extent. One, maybe because of the cost and complexity of doing something like that, like building a RAG solution on top of such a huge corpus of information, as I'm sure you have in the state of Utah. But even the kind of service agent use case you suggested, right, where it comes down to optional use and that person maybe just not using the chatbot in the first place. So I think there's interesting things there. One, you mentioned just kind of force the adoption to some extent, like just use a triage system where the chatbot talks to the person first and then maybe passes it off onto an agent for long tail use cases or something like that. But can you dig into a little bit some of the problems you faced when you were trying to build those kind of chatbot solutions? Because you said something else that I thought was very illuminating, which was that idea of like these POCs, the vendors all offering essentially like free services and free tokens for POCs. But then when the reality of the cost hits, when you're trying to go to deployment, then you realize that it's just not like a feasible project. Can you walk through, one, some of the complexities of building these solutions, and then two, maybe what that ROI analysis looks like when you're starting to really evaluate a use case?
Yeah, we could probably spend hours on this, Ben.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our journey of discovery was, and I'll kind of limit this to the chatbot side because there are other use cases like code assist, for example. We use, we have several different solutions that are approved for use for code assist. But this chatbot thing has gone through a really interesting evolution. When we started this journey about it was like I said, around May 2024. Gemini for Google Workspace, we had not initiated a pilot with it, and we were actually working in-house to engineer a chatbot like a ChatGPT that could be used with guardrails. It's hard to believe that was like 18 months ago, not even 18 months ago. We had a person who was working on this, to basically build a bot because the costs of inference and it was expensive. And then what we started to see in mid 2024 is vendors, including hyperscalers, coming out with low code platforms. So you had Google Agent Builder, or you had Amazon Q for business, and a variety of these kind of low code platforms. And we thought, this is fantastic, right? We don't have to spend a lot of time engineering this stuff. We can use the platform. What we found is that they are good for a fairly narrow set of use cases, but when things got to get complicated, you got to go pro code. And not only that, more recently, more agentic. Even for something like, a citizen-facing chatbot, which we've done a fair amount of work to study, but we have not yet deployed a citizen-facing proof of concept. But we've done a lot of internal work on this. You end up creating, a multi-agent approach where you've got one agent that is just screening the question to see if it's appropriate to be answered or not. Another agent that looks to see, hey, is this question already part of the FAQs? Can we retrieve a response really quickly? And if not, handing over to another agent that rewrites the question, and then another agent that goes and searches. And then you do this and you think, this is great. We are increasing the accuracy. The responses are coming through, and then we are burning through a lot of tokens because every conversation can, have all of these interactions with all of these agents. And that's a fairly simple example. It makes it really difficult to start to estimate costs. And at the same time, the vendors have continuously evolved their business models, and I'll give a particular example. I'm not going to name the vendor, but when we were looking at a particular solution for our state, we got an estimate that was an 8-figure estimate from the vendor. And then we went back and said, well, that's a challenge for us. That turned into a 7-figure estimate, which then turned into a 6-figure estimate, which ended up in a 5-figure dollar amount. I've never seen anything like this, where, you get a vendor who deprecates a model and they come out with a newer one, and the newer one is 90% cheaper than the old one. Like, wow, it's a very, very challenging environment to operate in, not just programmatically, where I don't know if your other guests have said this, but I feel like our engineers are learning learning alongside the vendor engineers as they're figuring out how these tools work.
Yeah.
And things change on the daily. The same thing is happening on the commercials. The business models and the pricing plans are fluctuating all the time. It makes it really difficult, especially in public sector, where you have to you've got one time a year you can go to the legislature and you can ask for funding, and you have no idea, like, am I asking for the right number? Am I asking for the right amount of money here? Because the vendors could completely change it up. We have a fiscal year that runs from July to June. The next batch of funding will be passed by the legislature in the January to March legislative session and will become effective on July 1 of 2026. I really don't know. Like, I'm putting together things and estimates right now. New technology could be released between now and July 1 that could significantly change how we might want to approach something like citizen-facing AI, for example, and could also be really disruptive on the cost side of things. So it's a challenging moment. I probably strayed from the original question there, and I kind of went on a soapbox of this unpredictability, but it is a big challenge that we certainly face, particularly in public sector.
I love the soapbox and the tangent, because that unpredictability is something that is very, very difficult for anyone to handle. And I've had many people on this show mention some version of that. And there's so many nuances to why it's playing out that way, right? You mentioned the deal that kind of dropped in cost over multiple figures very, very quickly. I feel like there's this massive market cash grab going on between a lot of the major providers to just get as many contracts as they can to prove like the growth of this business unit, just like was happening in cloud. I feel like a lot of that is moving to AI, but is very, very connected to cloud compute anyway. But then the other side of it being the complexity of the use case, right? Like, it doesn't matter that a model provider has extremely transparent token-based pricing when it's incredibly difficult to gauge the number of tokens you're going to use for even the most simplistic use case. Especially, I love the agentic example, where what feels like, the way that it's positioned sometimes is this like general intelligence that's going to be able to just solve this problem when you point it at a domain. The reality being that you're building systems that are like these chains of agents that are so constrained that you're wondering, like, why not use robotic process automation at the beginning or something? I find the spectrum of that is so interesting. And I think it speaks to what you're talking about as well, which is this environment where so much is changing so rapidly. Like, the costs are plummeting, the models might be commoditized, but then there's all this stuff going around the models to make them useful. Looking forward for you, what does that even mean for like AI in government operations over the next 3 years, both from like what capabilities you will want to focus on, and also some of the challenges that you feel like you'll encounter as you try to bring it to market or to your citizens?
Yeah, I'll start with the challenges. So you mentioned, I should have started with this, but you mentioned the desire to say we're going to build the one ring to rule them all type of thing, the chatbot that can answer all questions. Well, from a citizen perspective, that's what they want, right? They want to have an engagement that happens in a single interface that can help them answer their question, resolve their concern. Technically, that is hard. And it can be expensive, right? Building and updating vector databases is costly. The storage is costly. The compute is costly. The inference is costly for the usage of this. And the bigger you get them, the less accurate they are. So you look at, creating different kinds of architectures to say, okay, well, maybe we have a series of these and we have an orchestrator that kind of passes on. It tries to define, okay, which of these data sources really holds the answer. And we're going to pass this to another agent that kind of lords over that particular agency's data sources or whatever, right? So, and, traditional RAG, combining it with some type of web search capabilities. The engineering there is not easy. So that's one. I hope that the tools will evolve and get better over time so that we can really create these elegant experiences for our end users. But then coming back to what I was saying before, looking at impactful use cases, I think is going to be really important. And for me, it's really going to be driven by automation. So you mentioned, hey, maybe we should just go back to RPA, right? But the automation part of that is really important. And we see from the office productivity side, there are efficiency gains. They are incremental. Right? They're not super awesome. Like, oh, we saved 80% of the time. Okay, yeah, if you have customer-facing AI that can deflect a lot of incoming calls, that is fantastic. That's great. But there are a lot of internal processes in government that are still very manual, either the process itself or the adjudication of it, reviewing a lot of information to make a decision. They're laborious, time-consuming processes. And I think that's where kind of the agentic thing can play a role in streamlining and making those processes much more efficient. The other thing that I see coming down horizon, it's a big deal in our state, is digital identity. So we have an initiative in the state for state-endorsed digital identity, which is a little bit different than a verifiable digital credential. But that is going to be a huge thing, I think, in 3 to 5 years, particularly as people start having all these agents that are touting to represent them. They're reporting, I represent this person and I'm going to have this agent process this transaction for me. Do you really represent that person? I think that there are a lot of identity questions that are going to need to be resolved for people to prove that they themselves are who they are when they perform a transaction, or that their agent that is processing a transaction is duly authorized to process that transaction on their behalf. So I see in the next 3 to 5 years, at least in the state of Utah, there's going to be a huge amount of movement in that area as we push for state-endorsed digital identity, which is an entirely different topic, but one that I am really, really excited about.
I feel like we could probably spend a 5-hour podcast talking about the role of digital identity in agentic solutions for the government. So that's something maybe we can have another show about. But I do love that point, right? That from a pure just opportunity perspective, that opens up so many things in terms of how citizens can interact with government services, but also so much complexity in terms of how, like you said, right? Ensuring it's the right identity of the person requesting, the authorizer, ensuring, chains of authorizations for whatever databases that agent is allowed to connect to across so many different things. It's not an easy solution to engineer. So I wish you a lot of luck in that process. And yeah, it's something that I think I will be watching with interest. Are there anything, is there anything that you look to the private sector for right now, where you kind of wish you could bring that in faster than you are in government use cases, or just kind of any examples that come to mind that you find inspiring?
Like I said earlier, the private sector can move faster. It's just a given. I think that in some respects, we are able in government to kind of look to the private sector to take chances and risks and kind of uncover things, both risks and opportunities, that we let them, basically do the experimentation on that because they can. One thing that I think the state is really doing well, and this doesn't sit with me, it sits with Dr. Zach Boyd in the Office of AI Policy, is they are working quite closely with industry to identify potential areas of opportunity for AI to make a difference, and understanding the regulatory environment around those opportunities and seeing if there is a possibility to create some type of temporary regulatory relief so that these ideas can be tested safely, but without having to pass the full weight of regulatory requirements from the outset, because that can stifle innovation. And so they're trying to create ways to balance safety and innovation. I think this is really, really interesting, and not just for private industry, but also for public sector as well. I personally and our team, our AI team, work closely with the Office of AI Policy to understand regulations around citizen-facing chatbots, around student-facing chatbots, et cetera. So we make sure that we're not headed down a wrong path as well. I think there are definitely lessons to be learned from the private sector. There are ways for government to look at what the private sector is doing and learn the lessons and try to apply those in a public sector environment.
And when you say kind of regulatory relief or some kind of innovation projects, would that be something along the lines of having some sort of sample data set that you could apply to a given use case, and like a set of technologies, for example, where you could explore without having to go through all of the regulatory hurdles that you would have to go through for a full-scale deployment? Or like, what does that look like?
So I'd say probably the most concrete example here in the state right now is with mental health, right? So there are a lot of chatbots, or there are use cases where there are companion AI use cases, or people are leaning on them for mental health advice. But there are regulations in the state. This is one of the reasons why the Office of AI Policy sits within the Department of Commerce, and you should actually talk to them about this. But just to kind of give a really simplified view of it, to be a mental health practitioner in the state, you require a license, right? Not just anybody can be a mental health professional in the state of Utah. It requires a business license. So what does that mean for AI? Can AI be licensed? Well, maybe not. There's some gray areas there, right? So the Office of AI Policy kind of steps in and says, hey, let's work with the various agencies who have these kinds of regulations in their scope to see if there's a way where we could offer, or we could provide companies who are interested in this space some opportunity to test out ideas without necessarily having to go through a full process to see whether an AI can be licensed to be a medical health practitioner or a mental health practitioner, right? So that's kind of a practical application, but it's one of many where there's a lot of regulation exists that ostensibly exists for the benefit of the citizens and the residents of the state, but could inhibit some innovations, or there's some things that can be done to help mitigate some of the risk associated with bringing to light or even testing out this kind of technology.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I could talk about this forever, Christian, so I'll stop us there. But I do want to go through a really quick lightning round, which, what might be one of the biggest implementation mistakes that you see repeatedly across AI projects?
Do because we can, not because we should.
That's a good one. What's one AI tool that you think every chief AI officer or head of AI should be using, but probably isn't?
I'll be boring. It's whatever AI tools associated with your office productivity suite.
And when should an agency use a vendor solution versus building in-house, in your opinion? That's a huge question, but I'll stick it in the lightning round.
It's all driven by business value. So, you need to make an informed decision on buy versus build. It's not easy.
Yeah, I think it's like, as you pointed out with what you discussed earlier, an increasingly difficult calculation to make. Christian, thanks so much for joining today. I really enjoyed it. If people that are listening and watching want to follow your work, where should they go?
So if you want to connect, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. Look up Christian Napier. You'll find me there. So you can connect with me there. Or you're welcome to email me at my government email address, cnapier@utah.gov.
All right. Well, you heard it. That was Christian Napier, who is the Director of AI at the Utah Division of Technology Services. Christian, thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Ben.